The Agile method allows modern development teams to rapidly build software that is both efficient and effective. Agile is considered to be a lightweight methodology. Unlike more structured traditional development methods, it is acclaimed for its flexibility, even in situations where changing or ambiguous project requirements seem to be the norm. At the core of every Agile project is a cross-functional team of professionals. These professionals include, among others, project owners, software architects, designers, quality assurance, and documentation experts. The product team works collaboratively, using Agile's documented principles and processes to move development projects from concept to a successful completion. In this report, we'll provide viewers with a practical introduction to the world of Agile software development. Hello, I'm Michael Quinlan, and welcome to Agile Software Development, an Introduction. This report features expert Alex Adamopolous, CEO of the global professional services consultancy, Emergn. By utilizing Agile and Lean practices, Emergn helps their clients drive IT change initiatives that fundamentally enhance organizational agility. There are several teaching points in this program. First, with the help of our expert, we'll explore the history of the Agile development methodology. Next, we'll ask about how Agile teams are structured and the types of development projects that work best with Agile methods. And finally, we'll conclude by discussing the challenges faced by software development teams and hear best practices that should be included in Agile development projects. In our first segment, we'll look at the history of Agile and learn about the Agile Manifesto, which documents and defines the principles of Agile software development. We're all aware of the alarmingly poor track record for software development projects. Experts tell us that in the course of a year, up to 80% of software projects may fail, and according to figures released by the IEEE, a staggering $60 billion is wasted annually supporting these derailed efforts. The typical and frequently quoted reasons for failed development projects include poorly documented client requirements, impractical schedules, change management problems, testing issues, and overly rigid processes. For these reasons and many others, developers have turned to Agile methodologies, considering them a breath of fresh air for the software development process. Agile offers a flexible and practical approach to development that the traditional methods can't deliver. To learn more about Agile, we'll turn to our expert and interview guest, Alex Adamopolous, CEO of Emergn. Alex, welcome to our program.
Thank you for having me here today. I'm very excited to talk to you about Agile development.
Now, Alex, to get started, tell us a little bit about the history of Agile development. What are its roots and how did it get started?
I think the easiest way to talk about Agile and its history is just to go back to the early part of the decade. So around 2000, 2001, a group of folks got together. They signed this thing called the Agile Manifesto. And this was signed by a number of people that had demonstrable success in IT and software development, really well-known thinkers in the space, basically, that had taken some practices and some disciplines, called them Agile, as a means of explaining that there were certain ways to make software better, faster, at the same time improving the way teams worked together and collaborated, emphasis being on people versus process. So if you look back 10, 11 years, this manifesto was signed, and then what happened essentially is it began to be applied in differing environments by these same people and some of their followers. Over time, it became a popular topic. There were books written about Agile as a software development methodology and potentially a game changer in the way you made an application. And it really wasn't until, I would say, the 2005, 2006 timeframe that you started seeing examples of large enterprises begin to use Agile in a way that they became popular. And you started seeing case studies coming out on how Agile was a very different way of making software than the traditional Waterfall approach that many of us are used to. So from about 2001 to 2006, you had this element of Agile as an up-and-coming development methodology, very similar to the way RUP became popular in the 90s as well. And then really from 2006 to today, what we've seen is this uptick of acceptance that Agile really can play nicely in the enterprise. So it's not only going to shape the way I make software, but it actually has benefits to the way I may run my entire life cycle of an IT project.
You referred to the Agile Manifesto a minute ago, a document that defines the core principles and processes of the Agile methodology. Can you tell us more about the document and what it's all about?
The Agile Manifesto is a set of working principles that emphasize some of the things that are very different than the traditional way we've made software. So collaboration and communication became a little more important in the Agile Manifesto. The idea of focusing on people, not just the processes we used, was another big thing that came forward. The element of having working software was a good measure of success, although that's not the measure of success. The idea here is that we needed to look at what the outcomes needed to be when we were working on a software project, not just the way we actually did the software project, which I think has been the major difference with the manifesto. So it was really the groundwork of laying a foundation of how we wanted to work differently as a group of people in the future.
And Alex, could you take a moment to compare Agile to traditional development methods? How do they differ?
So the biggest comparison between Agile and traditional ways of making software is really the level of ongoing inspection and awareness of the project at any given point in its life cycle. So traditionally, when we have seen waterfall-led projects, requirements were developed for the given project. The project would kick off, team would go away and start working on the project, and they would have a certain milestone at which point they would present something working, a working piece of software. That milestone was typically 3, 5, even 6 months later in the life cycle of the project, and it became accepted that this is the way it was going to work. People had to go off and develop software. There's a lot of technical skill involved. There's a lot of testing. There's a lot of things that go on to ensure that the software, the application is coming along. And that's the way it was. Agile brought on this whole new paradigm that we should be able to inspect the software in increments. So as opposed to 3 months, why can't we look at a working piece of software every 3 weeks or every 2 weeks? And they gave a name to these 2 or 3 week cycles, and they called them sprints, because the whole idea was we're sprinting to something. Let's sprint to the next 2 weeks. So there's this notion in Agile, a myth, if you will, that Agile means no documentation or Agile means no requirements. Agile means less documentation and less requirements up front. There's still an enormous amount of work that has to go into planning the work, understanding what you're going to be working on, and developing this thing called a backlog so we know what our work in progress is. But the difference is with Agile versus Waterfall is we're now going to build software in an incremental fashion, so I can show you as the user or the business something working every 2 weeks, for example, versus making you wait a quarter or two to see where we are in the process.
I'll bet Agile has changed quite a bit since its early days. From your point of view, how has it evolved since it first appeared on the scene? What have you observed?
Agile has definitely evolved since it really became accepted in the early part of the decade. I would say it's evolved, again, from a way of making software, so a traditional software development methodology being Waterfall. Now we have Agile on the scene, which is a better way of making software. It's now becoming very much an accepted medium for how you can actually run IT or even engage better and align with the business. So you might be aware that for the last, 20 years, we've all been talking about this, IT and business alignment issue. It seems to be the most popular topic that everyone seems to want to write about. Agile thinking and the practices that it represents, I would say, for the first time, represent a real possible solution to solving the alignment challenge between IT and business. Because if you look at the manifesto and the principles it stood for, and if you look at some of the most successful Agile transformation or enterprise deployments, you're going to see something common across all of them, a common thread, if you will. And that is, it has forced people to talk more, to collaborate more, and to really lower these walls or these boundaries between groups or divisions. And I think that's the evolution of Agile. It's becoming very much a way of working versus just a software development methodology.
And Alex, in a nutshell, could you tell us why Agile is so important to the software development world today?
Agile is very important to software development today because what it's doing is it's allowing organizations to be nimble and flexible, if you will, in terms of bringing their products and services to market. So I would say in the current economic climate, with so much pressure on performance, so much pressure on having the right product at the right time, all the emphasis on expanding market share and capturing revenue that companies have, you're not really going to do that by using traditional ways of working where you're waiting 6 months or a year to introduce a feature or launch a product. You really need the ability today to look at working software on a very frequent basis so you can make adjustments, you can tweak it, and more importantly, you can have a competitive advantage to know what you need to do at any given point. That's why I think Agile is not a silver bullet any longer. It's definitely become a staple in a way of working in many large companies.
Next, we'll learn how Agile teams are structured and if there are specific types of development projects that are particularly a good fit for Agile methods. Agile continues to gain popularity and momentum. In fact, a survey of 1,300 IT professionals by the IT research firm Forrester found that 35% of those responding to the survey indicated that Agile closely reflects their current development practices. And we should note that the 35% increased to 46% when the definition of Agile included development practices such as rational, unified process, or spiral. Additionally, the survey found that Scrum was the favored form of Agile project management according to nearly 11% of the survey respondents. Experts tell us that developers generally praise Agile for its transparency and project manageability. Clients and customers appreciate the speed at which applications can be designed and deployed with Agile. Additionally, development costs are lower and project funding can be allocated in smaller amounts due to Agile's incremental development process. Let's turn once again to our expert and learn more about Agile projects and development teams. Alex, I've read that Agile was really designed with smaller development projects in mind. Now it seems that larger projects are also embracing Agile development methodologies. Could you comment on that?
I think the idea that Agile is more for small to medium enterprise versus large is nothing more than just the way it was introduced. It's like anything. When a new concept is introduced, you have the early adopters. And the early adopters in this case of Agile were just smaller organizations, mostly software or technology companies that found it easier to use it in order to deploy a product. It doesn't mean that it couldn't have been used in an enterprise from the get-go. It just wasn't. So I would say that's a complete myth. I would say that the enterprise market, large global multinational companies across what I've seen, many, many different industry segments are successfully using Agile as much as the small to medium enterprise has used it.
From your perspective then, what types of development projects work best with Agile methods? Is it ever not a good choice?
We often get asked about what type of project should I be using Agile on? And the answer could vary, but my answer is typically one that gets a little bit of a surprising response from a client, and that is use it on your most complex project. If you're a bank and you're rolling out some global derivatives or trading application and you're struggling to get it out, put that thinking on that project. So many times a customer or a CIO might say to us, well, how could you expect me to do that? It would disrupt the flow. My response is, but what's the flow now? So where are we now in the life cycle of this project? I'm tempted to give the blanket answer, which is you can use Agile on any type of project, and the truth is you could. But if you're a large enterprise client that is seeking to be different and to differentiate, if competitive advantage and market share is a driver for you, if you're looking how to innovate and just be better, faster, then I see no reason why Agile can't be applied to any given project you're currently in process with. But certainly, can it be applied to a new project? Absolutely. It's probably the easiest way to use it is from a green field where we have not done any real thinking yet, but we know we're going to build this new web platform or this new front office sales tool for our salespeople in the field, for example. But I would be a fan of using it on any project.
Well, you did a great job defining the Agile term sprint in the previous segment, but what about Scrum? What does that term refer to, and how is it associated with Agile?
Well, just like sprint associates itself with this idea of running towards something, the idea of Scrum really came out of this whole idea of, if you've ever watched rugby and you've watched the players congregate over the ball in this thing they call a scrum. The idea of Scrum is really the idea of team, the idea of having every member on the team be part of that team and have equal share or equal rights to that team. Where the hierarchy begins to go away and the idea of having the team be self-organizing takes shape. So the idea of a Scrum is this idea of coming together on a daily basis, if not more frequently, to discuss where we are on this given project. What did we do yesterday? What are we going to do today? What are we going to deliver tomorrow? What impediments or obstacles are in our way? Answering some basic questions as a team that then helps us go away and fulfill our respective roles on that given project. So it's the idea of coming together in a Scrum, if you will.
Could you take just a moment to comment on the importance of team dynamics in Agile projects?
I think Agile is absolutely related to team sport. The thinking behind Agile is very supportive of people. It's very supportive of collaboration. It's very supportive of all the things that we would relate to human touch or the human element of working together. So it doesn't negate process or minimize it. It doesn't negate structure or management or leadership or hierarchy. It doesn't take those concepts and say they're irrelevant or not needed. But what it does do, it actually puts the light a little more on the idea of people. People need to work together, and people on the team have to take on the same level of responsibility and accountability and even transparency as everyone else on the team. So I might be your manager on the team, and I might be responsible to lead the engagement. But you as my team member who's fulfilling a role has the same level of transparency for the work you're doing as I do. And that's not really the kind of thinking you'll find on traditional development teams or organizations. And that's the other thing about Agile. It has really raised the bar on transparency and accountability within teams and what people really are and are not capable of doing.
And Alex, speak a moment about how Agile development teams are structured.
So when you look at the structure of an Agile team, you typically have some common roles. The most common role on an Agile team is this role that is called Scrum Master. The idea that this person who's leading the Scrum, the team, they are the master of this team, they're the leader. So their responsibility is to bring the thinking, the learning, the Agile discipline and practices to the rest of the team. In some respects, they operate a little bit as a mentor or as a coach. In other respects, they operate as a project manager or program manager. But really what they're there to do in that management capacity is ensure that the practices and principles of Agile that this team has adopted are being implemented and used correctly. So that's the most common role that you'll see. The other role that's very common is actually represented on the business side. So let's say I'm the IT project team for your new financial application, and you are the financial department and you're my customer. You're going to assign somebody called a product owner. So the product owner role is the role of the person from the business side that interfaces with me as the Scrum Master, and our relationship is day to day, making sure that both the requirements and expectations of the business are being met, and I'm making sure that your expectations are being fulfilled on the IT side. So it's this dynamic between product owner and Scrum Master that you'll see as the most common roles on an Agile team.
We'll conclude this report by discussing some of the leading challenges faced by Agile software developers today. We'll also learn best practices that teams should incorporate into their development projects. In our presentation today, we have explored the history of the Agile development methodology. We've looked at Agile teams and learned how they are structured. We've also discussed the types of development projects that are well suited for Agile methods. We'll now conclude our program with some added thoughts and advice from our expert. Alex, from your perspective, what are the biggest challenges faced by developers utilizing the Agile method? How can they best overcome the challenges?
I believe in today's market, the challenges that developers face with becoming more agile, if you will, is really going to be related to the organization they're working in. So it's going to be something that stems from the leadership or the management of the company or organization that's saying, we either want to work this way or we don't. It really comes down to that. I don't believe there's any developer that I've met, especially ones that have traditionally been waterfall kind of team members, that have said, we don't want to learn Agile. I think any developer that's in the market working and wants to continuously improve absolutely wants to learn how to work better, learn what's new on the market, be educated, basically upskill themselves and increase their competency level. Why wouldn't they? So I don't think the challenge is really coming from the developer in terms of becoming more agile. I think it really comes from either team leaders or leadership in general that's saying, we're not sure this is the way we want to work yet, or, let's just do a little bit right now, but not so much. I think that's where you really see the impediments today to adopting more agile practices in an organization.
And how can developers become more informed about agile development and its principles and processes?
One of the ways I think that overcoming those obstacles can happen by a developer is they have to take a little bit of interest in self-learning. So there are many vehicles today that would allow any developer to both get read up and even participate in agile communities where they can increase their learning. And they can do this at little or no cost. Fortunately, it's something that's been very positive in the agile community in the last decade. Has been this whole idea of building communities. And there are communities by city, by state, national communities, global communities, online communities for people that want to increase their awareness and skill. And they can do it relatively inexpensively. In many cases, they can do it at no cost and just get the information they need to become better. And we've seen cases where some developers have taken this learning, have really adopted it, and then brought it to their leadership inside the companies, and that's caused the response to be very positive.
Alex, could you offer some best practices that agile development teams should adhere to and make part of their day-to-day activities?
I think there are three main practices that I see in Agile that I would always recommend a team get really good at. There are several, but these three seem to stick out the most. The first one is this idea of a user story. There are different ways to write user stories. So the conversation isn't about what is the best format, but a user story is a concise set of what we would traditionally call requirements. It's working in a way with the team and the key stakeholders in the room that come also from the business side and IT to collaborate, to define a story, what we may call a feature or a requirement for this project, and to define it in such a way that it's concise, it's clear, and that the acceptance criteria are yes or no questions, meaning we know that this is done when these things have happened. So what does done look like? What does great look like? These are questions we ask around defining a user story. The second would be business value prioritization. Once you have your stories, you want to make sure you're working on the story of the highest value in the right order. So prioritizing your work according to value is hugely important. And again, there are differing mechanisms for how you might do this, but there are very common business value prioritization practices in Agile that should be employed. And some of the best teams are finding that it's an invaluable way to prioritize the work and make sure the backlog represents the most important work in the right order. The last practice, I would say, is the retrospective. So one of the key elements of ongoing communication in an Agile team is reflecting on how we're doing on the project. And doing this frequently is important so we can make necessary adjustments. When you look at a retrospective, it's asking some basic questions. So what's working well? One of the questions would be, what's not working so well? What's puzzling us, or what problems or impediments are we facing? And how do we actually resolve them? And I think if you can ask and answer some of those common questions on a regular basis, you're going to find the teams working much better.
From the perspective of a business or financial professional, what do you believe Agile development brings to the table?
The advantages that Agile brings, especially for the more business-oriented people in an enterprise, are really going to be measured around the company's executive dashboard. So as a company, we'll assume that there are a set of indicators or measures that that company uses to look at how well they're doing. Whether they call it a dashboard or they call it a scorecard, they're going to be using some criteria to measure their success. And they're going to measure it in different ways. They're going to look at themselves from a corporate level. They're going to look at themselves by department, maybe by the type of service or product they're offering. Regardless of how they actually break it down, the business-oriented people are going to want to know how we're doing. So from an Agile perspective, Agile is giving them the ability to deliver faster and smarter to the business. This is the whole reason we're using it, because we can identify quickly whether what we're working on is making sense for the business. One of the principles in Agile is called fail fast. It allows us to fail fast. We can know sooner than later that we're doing the right thing, or we should just halt right here and change direction. And that's something a CFO or a CEO would definitely want to know, especially about some very large or very important product that they may be depending on as a way to change their whole market position.
Okay then. Well, let me just take it a step further and ask, what do the business leaders who are sponsoring development projects most need to understand about Agile?
As a sponsor of a project where Agile will be the approach of choice, one thing we definitely want to make sure people know, especially the sponsors and the key stakeholders, is that the biggest thing that they're going to have to really be aware of is the mindset and cultural impact Agile has on an organization. Agile changes the way you think about working. So if you walk into a large enterprise or even a government department or someone who's been working a certain way for 10, 15, 20 years, and you're now going to tell them, here's a whole new set of principles for how we want you to work, they may be excited, but it's going to come with a challenge. Because now it's, like we said earlier, Agile raises the bar on personal transparency and accountability. So now people are more aware of your work, and they're more aware of seeing where you are in the process and inspecting it. So it makes you a little bit uncomfortable at times to be aware of just how much transparency Agile can build into a team. So a sponsor and a stakeholder needs to understand that mindset change, mind shift, cultural impact, these are the things that are going to be most prevalent, which is why today I believe you'll see more and more Agile being used for things like change management, organizational design, those areas where it becomes more about people and how they work versus just the project. And I think that is what we said earlier about the evolution of Agile. That's what a sponsor needs to know.
Okay, excellent. And to wrap it up, Alex, in order to have the best chance for success with Agile projects, what are your recommendations?
I think to be successful with an Agile development project, there are a few things that you should really get to know or do right from the onset. One is define the principles from Agile that you believe are best suited to your organization. And what I mean is you're not going to adopt every Agile practice or principle. So you really need to inspect and understand which ones make the most sense now for your team and your organization versus adopting some later. So defining the initial set of Agile practices. I'd say the second thing is making sure that there's some kind of a glossary of terms defined. People use Agile in so many different ways. The warning label here is don't buy Agile as a label, because that's why people buy it. They buy it as a label. We want to be Agile. We want to go Agile. That's great. And usually when you talk to them, you find out what they're really saying is we just want to be a better run organization, or we want to deliver this product faster. But I would always warn them not to buy the label and really try to work up front to define what Agile means for them, because one of the more important challenges that they face once they get started is making sure everyone's on board with the same definition. So defining your set of principles, defining your set of terms so everyone understands that. And then I would say lastly, make sure that you over-communicate. Make sure that from the sponsor all the way down to the Scrum Master and the project team and the virtual teams that are involved and the partners or suppliers that are involved, make sure everyone understands what you're trying to do and why, so there's a common ground.
Finally, Alex, are there any other thoughts or perspectives on Agile that you can leave our audience with today?
One other perspective, which I've shared before, and again, I've made it, I guess, an important part of when I talk with anyone is this whole idea around value, flow, and quality. So this is a really important principle for me because I think it's extremely important for organizations to ask that question. So you'll hear me asking this a lot. And how are we increasing value? So if we're going to adopt Agile as a way of working or as a way of thinking in our organization, what does that mean in terms of increasing value in this organization or even to our people? How are we improving the flow? Is it actually improving how we get a product or the service to the market? Is it enabling our people better? Are they learning to be better? And the other thing would be, how are we advancing the quality? The whole idea around Agile has been that I can increase value, I can improve the flow, and I can advance the quality. If those things are true, then I think the best practice or the best thing a company can do, for example, is inspect those three on an ongoing basis.
Alex Adamopolous, CEO of Emergn, thanks so much for appearing on our program and bringing us up to date on this important topic.
Thank you for having me. It's been great to be here.
Well, that completes our program for today. I'm Michael Quinlan, and thanks again for viewing this presentation of Agile Software Development and Introduction.